This week we've read A Bronzeville Mother Loiters in Mississippi while a Mississippi Mother Burns Bacon and Going to Meet the Man. Both discuss lynching from a white perspective, and both stories have a lot of similarities and differences to each other. Um, One similarity that they have is both narrators of the story have no choice but to go along with what's happening with the lynching. In A Bronsonville Mother Loiters in Mississippi while a Mississippi Mother Burns Bacon, it's the perspective of a white woman in the South. And while white women had much more rights and privileges and the ability to do more things than African Americans in the South, they still had to be obedient to their husbands or fathers, depending on their age. Actually, in the poem, it talks about how her husband, when they're getting ready for their meal, she has to make sure that she looks all nice and presentable because she has to always be pleasing him and always be appealing to him because he can never wonder, was she worth it? Was she worth saying no to everything else? Was she worth all the sacrifices that he made? And she says he can never feel like that. And when he comes in, he actually hits one of their children, and she walks away from him to go look out the window because she can't do anything to help her children because she can't say, don't hit them. She has to go along with what he does and says. So even with regards to the lynching, she can't be like, we shouldn't do this. This was wrong. She always has to agree with him. And in Going to Meet the Man, the narrator is, I believe, 8 years old when he goes to watch this lynching with his mother and father. He can't say, why are we doing this to him? What did he do to deserve this? He can't speak out against it without his dad getting upset because his father was very much in support of this. Even his mother, he talks about how her eyes brightened and she was the most beautiful he'd ever seen her at the time of the lynching. So neither of our narrators in either story could do anything to stop the lynching. They couldn't speak out against the lynching because of their roles at the time of the lynching. As I mentioned earlier, another similarity between the two stories is that they both take the white perspective of lynching, looks at how white people felt about it, what they thought the reasoning was behind it, and just their thoughts on it, where it was something that didn't happen to them or to anyone in their family, but it happened around them. Even if they weren't an active participant, or even if they believed it was wrong, it was still something they never had to worry about. It was something they never had to fear. So it was just their opinion on it. And another similarity in the story is both narrators wonder why. In Going to Get the Man, the narrator as a child wonders what this man did to warrant this torturous death that everyone else is having a picnic around. He wonders, what did he do that was so bad to deserve this punishment? And he can't vocalize that because it was an African American man, so instantly he's wrong, he's bad, and there's just no ifs or buts. The woman in A Bronsonville Mother Loiters in Mississippi, meanwhile a Mississippi Mother Burns Bacon, she wonders, did this child, because the boy who was lynched in the poem was 14 years old, she wonders, did this child really do something to warrant this death at 14? the there was also quite a few differences between the two narrators. One, of course, being gender. One was a female narrator, one was a male narrator. And this was interesting, especially because females are thought to be more inherently compassionate, more inherently nurturing. So when it was a boy in that story who was lynched, it kind of just like really struck her more, like because it was a child. And whereas guys are supposed to put on like a brave face, they're supposed to be tough and masculine and protect their people. He was more of this is right because it protects us. Um, Another difference was their thoughts on the lynching that was taking place and how their thought process worked through it. The woman in the poem thought of it as like a storybook. Like when you're little and you hear the tales of the evil villain who captures the beautiful princess and then the knight in shining armor who comes and saves her. She thought it in that respect, where the African Americans were the dark, evil villains, and the white men were the knights in shining armor who were coming to protect her as the princess. And she talks about how in the stories it's always cut and dry. It's they're bad, they're evil, they do all these horrible things, and the knight is good, they are protecting you, they are doing the right thing, and the princess is just innocent. But in the lynching that the story is about, it was about a 14-year-old boy, and she talks about how there's much more gray in that because the villain's a little kid who doesn't even understand what's going on and why this is happening to him. And the knight in shining armor are grown men who are killing a child. And in Going to Meet the Man, the narrator kind of thinks of it as like a Law and Order sort of thing, like he was bad, this is his punishment. It's just much more real life versus how the female narrator discusses it almost more like a story, almost giving it like an air of fantasy that is used as like a defense mechanism to like justify this, whereas he's like, it's justified because of what it is. Another big difference is how they talk about it. He goes into a lot of detail about the actual lynching, about what's going on, about the people around him, about what they do to this man, and she's just can't believe that it's happening in general. Another difference in the stories is they talk about what they did, what the individuals did to deserve being lynched, and going to meet the man, he doesn't entirely know why he's being lynched, and he does wonder why he's being lynched, but he doesn't say anything about it. He kind of assumes from the older people's conversation in the story that it's because he was a criminal, he did something bad. But in the poem, the female narrator wonders, did he even do something to deserve this? Because she thinks the actual line from the poem was about, did he do anything to me? Did what he supposedly do warrant this? She says, so much had happened she could not remember what the foe had done against her or if anything had been done. So she doesn't believe that this crime fits this punishment. She doesn't even really understand if something happened to warrant this even happening to this 14-year-old boy. One really big thing I noticed that was different and similar in both stories was responsibility and overall culpability of the two narrators. The man in Going to Get the Man is not responsible for what happens when he's 8. He's 8 years old. He's a child himself. He has no power to stand up to all of these adults who are here having a picnic at a lynching. But he is responsible for perpetuating this behavior. He goes on and when he's talking about his life now, he talks about how African Americans are animals and how they should know better than to behave like this, and how they he insults them constantly. He talks about how they're lesser, and he puts all of the blame on them because they're bad. They should know better than to behave like this. They're animals and they're ruining the reputation of their town. And he perpetuates the behavior and hatred of lynching, talking about how he wishes they could set fire to the houses of African Americans, but unfortunately they live so spread out in the town that there's no way to burn all their houses down without killing everyone in the town. So he's responsible for this sort of behavior by further perpetuating it in the future, by letting it continue, letting the hatred build, and not taking any active roles to stop it. In the poem, she's also responsible because it hints at that her accusation against him is the reason that he's being lynched in the first place. So because of what she said he did, it's her fault. She's the reason that this is happening to him. And she's also part of the reason it's not stopped, because she doesn't say anything. She doesn't protect him. And it feels to me in the poem like she feels like she failed him because she didn't take any responsibility. She didn't try to stop it. She honestly wonders if anything even happened. But again, she wasn't in a position to stop it with her husband being the way he was. So I'd say overall the major similarities in the two stories is at the time of the lynching, neither narrator has a choice but to be obedient to what's happening. They both have to go along with it for their sake and their safety. They have to accept these awful things. And even though they don't completely understand why they have to go, they have to support the society that's perpetuating this behavior. One of the major differences is their attitudes towards it during and after the fact. The narrator in Going to Get the Man strongly supports this. Even when he's an adult, he talks about how just awful African Americans are to him and how they make everything look bad and they should know better. And he talks about when he goes around to collect rents and he's like, don't they know enough to save up? They don't know enough to save money because they know he's coming. They know what he needs. And actually he talks about when he gives all the kids candy, he talks about how he should be poisoning this candy because these kids are just going to grow up to be just like their parents. They're going to be in debt. They're going to be a nuisance on society. Whereas she's more wondering why this child was lynched. She does not agree with it. And she has young children of her own, and she can't protect them just like she couldn't protect this boy. She can't stand up against her husband when he hits them. And she couldn't stop this lynching. And I think she feels a lot of guilt for that. And again, something that was very similar and different throughout both stories was the responsibility and culpability, because she's responsible during it even though she doesn't agree with it, because it's happening because of what she said or what possibly happened between her and the boy. But he's responsible for this because even though he was a child when it happened, he perpetuates this attitude as an adult and doesn't work to change it. He just goes along following this mentality. of the South as a whole that they had towards African Americans.